oral questions. Question orale. The honourable member for Portage-Lister.
Mr. Speaker, Canada's economy was showing signs of trouble before COVID-19 hit, with record debt and out-of-control spending. In fact, in March of this year, prior to COVID, Canada lost over 1 million jobs, many of those in the energy sector. Since 2015, energy workers have been abandoned by this government. So when Keystone XL was approved in the U.S. in March of 2017, there was once again a glimmer of hope for Canadian workers. Those hopes are now at risk. What will the Prime Minister do to ensure that the Keystone XL project moves ahead in the United States?
Honourable Minister.
Speaker, let me be very clear to energy sector workers, especially those in Alberta who are worried about the future of this project. Our government has been and will be unwavering in its support for Keystone XL. We have been and will continue to advocate for this project to the U.S. government. In fact, the Prime Minister discussed this project on his very first call with the President-elect. Keystone is a good project. There are 1,500 Canadians working on it as we speak. We support them. Sorry, Mr. Speaker.
I'd like to remind the honourable members to turn off their microphones, mute themselves. J'aimerais rappeler aux députés.
I'd like to remind members to turn off their microphones, to mute themselves, please.
Madame Chabot, s'il vous plaît, mettez votre microphone.
Ms. Chabot, please mute your microphone.
OK, on a un petit problème, un des microphones.
We have a problem with a microphone then.
Member for Portage-Lister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. But here's the problem with the Liberals' answer. The Prime Minister said that he wants to phase out the oil sands. He said that in 2017. He attacked pipelines with Bill C-69. He implemented a tanker ban and a job-killing carbon tax. That has meant thousands of jobs lost in the West. Losing Keystone would mean at least 2,800 more jobs lost. So, what is the Prime Minister's plan to ensure that the Keystone XL project goes ahead so that more Canadian jobs are not lost?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister raised this issue with the President-elect on the very, very first call. We have been clear. There is a very, very strong argument for this project, and that continues regardless of who the President of the United States is. We will continue to make that argument. I would say that one of the strongest arguments for this project is that we have a government that is fighting climate change, that is putting a price on pollution, is making investments to help our energy sector become more sustainable than ever. Merci, Monsieur le Président.
The honourable member for Portage-Lister.
Well, recently, when asked if a Biden victory would mean the end of Keystone XL, the Prime Minister abdicated, saying, well, that's a question for Mr. Biden. This defeatist tone is unacceptable and provides no reassurances that he will actually fight on behalf of energy workers for this project to move forward. The success of Keystone XL would create 2,800 Canadian jobs and indirectly support 15,000 additional jobs. With the current COVID crisis, these jobs are more important than ever. So again, what is the Prime Minister's plan to ensure that KXL is not cancelled?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, let me quote, one of the real problems that I think lingers over Keystone XL is, before the pipeline question arose, the Harper government deliberately went out of its way to be seen as adversary of environmentalists. Who said that, Mr. Speaker? The former progressive conservative Prime Minister, Minister of Foreign Affairs, and member of Calgary Centre, the Right Honourable Joe Clark. I'll look over to the other side. The record of inaction and failure on the environment nearly doomed this project, Mr. Speaker. We have been unwavering in our support for Keystone. Speaker. We don't need any advice for the opposition.
Now, I believe the honourable member for Calgary, Edmonton, I'm sorry, please, you have a point of order?
Yes, I can barely hear the Parliamentary Secretary.
Yes, the Parliamentary Secretary, it sounds like there's a bad connection there. I would ask him to look into that, but if that's a good point of order. I just want to remind all the members, excuse me, order? Order? If I can have your attention for a moment, I just want to remind all the members, not only in the House, but especially the ones joining us virtually, to make sure that they're in a place where they have good connection so that we can hear everything they have to say. Everyone is just waiting with bated breath to hear their answers. L'honorable député de Louis.
The Honourable Member for Louis Saint-Laurent. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to be the member for Louis Saint-Laurent, but I'm not very proud at all of the member for Saint-Laurent. Last Thursday, I was at Parliamentary Committee, and she had the gall to question the fragility of French in Montreal. I'll quote her, and she said in English, "I need to see it to believe it." And in a sarcastic tone, she did this and talked about the decline of French in Montreal. It doesn't take a genius to understand that French is in a fragile state in Montreal. Can the Prime Minister, the member of Papineau, and the neighbor to the member for Saint-Laurent explain to her that she's completely out in left field? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Both official languages are extremely important. We acknowledge that French is a minority language in North America and Canada, and that there is a decline, and as a result, we must do more to protect French in Canada and throughout Quebec. In the throne speech, for the first time, we have committed to addressing this issue to resolve.
Dans les circonstances, nous allons.
And in the circumstances, we will be protecting both official languages.
Is it a point of order? Normally, we don't have point of orders during the question period unless it's a technical issue.
It's a technical issue in that the translation and the French were of the same volume and incomprehensible.
Okay, very good. I want to remind, j'aimerais rappeler aux députés.
I want to remind members.
Make sure you're on the button. You've switched on the language that you're speaking in. S'il vous plaît, faites sûr que vous êtes.
Ensure that you are on the language that you're speaking in.
Seem to have forgotten everything, so maybe by the time we're done today, we'll have that all back in order. L'honorable député de...
The Honourable Member for Saint-Laurent. Louis Saint-Laurent, the Honourable Member. Well, Mr. Speaker, the Minister said earlier that there needed to be a modernization of the Official Languages Act. They've been in power for 5 years. They've been saying that for 5 years, and they haven't done a thing. Why? Because the member for Saint-Laurent maybe has repeated these contemptuous comments to all of her colleagues. When will the government take action instead of simply lecturing everyone? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, we acknowledge that French is facing a decline in Montreal, Quebec, and elsewhere. We are taking action. We stated in the throne speech that more needed to be done, and that we would be modernizing the Official Languages Act. My colleague has no lectures to give because his party voted against the throne speech and voted against modernizing the Official Languages Act. So I hope that he will change his position and collaborate with us on this matter. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, if you want to be appointed a judge, become a Liberal. Everyone will work for you. Ministers, MPs, even their staff will help you become a judge. Last week, the Canadian Bar Association denounced the judicial appointments process, and I quote, "It's time to make the system more impervious to partisan manipulation." That's no small comment. It comes from the Canadian Bar Association, Mr. Speaker. Will the Liberals put an end to Liberal cronyism? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, we are very proud of the process we put in place in 2016 for the appointment of judges. It's a process that is based on merit. We are working through committees, and as a result, 400 exceptional judges reflecting Canada's diversity have been appointed. I'm very proud of the appointments we've made, and we will continue. The Honourable Member for Salaberry-sur-Roi. Mr. Speaker, well, that's the problem. The Minister boasts about his appointment process, but they'll go through the process. Lawyers are denouncing it. To quote again the Canadian Bar Association, the government risks undermining public confidence in the independence and fairness of the judicial system. Mr. Speaker, forget the process. No one believes in it. When will the Liberals stop favoring Liberals in judicial appointments? The Honourable Minister. Mr. Speaker, as I just said, the appointments are based on merit and diversity, based on a rigorous process that goes through committees where diversity and quality are the focus. Judges appointed through the process since 2016, 10% are visible minorities, 5% are LGBTQ. There are Indigenous members, and more than 50% are women. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Merci, Monsieur le Président.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During the first wave of COVID-19, conditions in long-term healthcare facilities were atrocious. Lives were lost. We had to send in the army. Now cases are on the rise, and the same conditions continue. Public health experts are demanding that the government establish a national standard of care for long-term care centres. Why is the Prime Minister dragging his feet instead of protecting our seniors? The Honourable Minister.
Speaker, and I share the member opposite's concern about the growing number of cases across the country, and we're working with all levels of government to make sure that we support people who are vulnerable from COVID-19. And I'll just say this, Mr. Speaker, we actually in the Safe Restart contributed $740 million to provinces and territories to strengthen their protections for long-term care home, and we committed to the creation of national standards with provinces and territories. We'll do that work, Mr. Speaker, together with the provinces and territories, who then will have better ability to deliver on their healthcare responsibilities.
Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Well, those national standards need to come quickly. We're seeing long-term care outbreaks across this country. In particular, for-profit long-term care centers are the site of the worst conditions, and Rivera-owned sites owned by the federal government are where some of the worst conditions are happening in Edmonton, in Winnipeg, and in Scarborough. In Winnipeg, paramedics arrived at a Rivera-owned long-term care home and found seniors left dead in their beds for hours. Will the Prime Minister commit today, once and for all, to remove profit from the care of our seniors?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I share the member opposite's deep concern that care for seniors has to be paramount for all of us. No matter what level of government we're at, we have to care about the dignity and safety of the seniors that are amongst us in our communities. And that's why we've been supporting provinces and territories, Mr. Speaker, to deliver on their responsibility. $740 million through the Safe Restart Agreement, additional supports through deployment of Canadian Red Cross, including into Manitoba, Ontario, and Quebec. Mr. Speaker, we'll be there for the provinces and territories as they work to protect long-term care residents from COVID-19.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, the government has spent billions of dollars to fight COVID, and many of the contracts have been distributed without a call for tenders. Not only did the Prime Minister give a $237 million contract to his friend Frank Baylis, but there's another $371 to another sole source service provider for medical gowns. We'd like to know the details of the contracts, but we're told we can't. Can the Prime Minister tell us why we have no right to this information? The Honourable Minister. I'd like to thank the member for mentioning the success of this company that made gowns so quickly and is delivering these gowns. It is ensuring the health and safety of frontline workers. I want to thank that company as well as all Canadian companies that have provided equipment to fight COVID-19 for their hard work, their dedication throughout this pandemic. The Honourable Member. Mr. Speaker, the Parliamentary Secretary has started to give an answer. They leased an aircraft. Well, we know that the $371 million went to a two-person company where they work at home, and that's all we know. The gowns, well, we learned that they were paid for. They cost 3 times market rates. We have no other information. Why is the government concealing this information with respect to gowns or ventilators? We're not talking about military equipment here. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. Mr. Speaker, efforts were made across the country to provide supply, to build the capacity here in Canada, to provide PPE to all Canadians. Of course, we are working with Canadian companies, including small businesses in Ontario, Quebec, and across the country from sea to sea, to meet our needs so that Canada is ready to face all situations. Many Quebec companies also took steps to provide medical equipment to Canada, just to mention a few. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
George.
Mr. Speaker, as Canadians continue to face a growing COVID pandemic, suicide rates are growing at an alarming rate. Last week, the Prime Minister encouraged Canadians who are feeling anxious or overwhelmed to call 211. For the record, 211 is not a suicide prevention hotline. It's a directory and may not even be available across our country. That's the equivalent of dialing 911 during an emergency and getting a recording or being put on hold. When minutes count, direct access can make the difference between a life saved or a life lost. Will the Prime Minister take real action, join Conservatives, ensure that our 988 motion will pass?
Well, Minister of Health.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And I want to just share with the member opposite that I also am deeply concerned about the mental health of Canadians in particular during COVID-19, but at all times. And we know that suicide prevention is so critically important. The member opposite knows I want to work with him on making sure that we have better and more rapid access to supports wherever a person is in this country. We know that when people reach out, they are often in their worst moments and they need immediate help. Thank you.
Honourable Member for Caribou Prince George.
So, to be clear, Mr. Speaker, through you, I'm asking the Minister for clarity. The motion has been tabled. If we sought unanimous consent, would the Minister seek that this motion would pass right now?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, when a motion receives unanimous consent by the House of Commons, of course, that's a very important measure to move forward. But listen, as I said to the member, I will work with his office tirelessly to make sure that we see his reality of better access to immediate care for people who are worrying about their mental health, who are considering suicide as a way to end their suffering. This is not acceptable, Mr. Speaker, that people have to wait for that help.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Over the last week, many parts of Canada have seen record-breaking numbers of COVID cases. The Liberals didn't even consider rapid tests until we were already well into the second wave. We needed to have the capacity to be testing, tracing, and isolating when provinces had 70 cases a day, not 1,400. After 10 months, hundreds of billions of dollars spent, thousands of lives and millions of jobs and businesses lost, and no action, the Liberals have put Canadians in harm's way. Why?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I share the member opposite's concern about the rapid growth of cases across the country. In fact, spent numerous hours this weekend speaking with health ministers across the country to make sure that they had what they need to combat the growth. In fact, we've shipped over 4.2 million rapid tests to provinces and territories to date, over 1.7 million to Ontario, 1.2 million to Quebec, 345,000 to BC, and we stand ready to help those provinces and territories with whatever they need to combat COVID-19.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Nose Hill.
Mr. Speaker, that's a drop in the bucket, and they should have been in place months ago. The Liberals wasted the summer trying to figure out how to get out of the WE scandal instead of getting these rapid tests. Canadians should have access to rapid tests now and a plan on vaccine distribution. Will the Prime Minister admit that these failures are why he's asking Canadians to cancel Christmas and saying some regions will get support for COVID, but not others?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, every step of the way, we've been there with provinces and territories as they work to combat this terrible disease. And indeed, we see cases growing across the country, and it's alarming, Mr. Speaker, and Canadians have every right to be concerned. We also know there's a light at the end of the tunnel, Mr. Speaker. Canada has procured more doses of vaccine per capita than any other country in the world. And Mr. Speaker, that light at the end of the tunnel should give us all hope. But in the meantime, Mr. Speaker, we'll work together in a Team Canada approach to make sure that we get through the next several months, together with the health and safety of Canadians and first and foremost.
The Honourable Member for La Pointe de l'Île. Mr. Speaker, Quebecers are worried about the future of their national language. According to a recent Léger poll, 2/3 are concerned about the state of French in Quebec and would support tougher laws to protect their common language. But let's face it, not all Quebecers are concerned. The MP for Saint-Laurent, who prefers English to French, thinks everything is fine. Does the Minister of Official Languages share the position of the member for Saint-Laurent, who sees no problem with the future of French in Quebec? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. On several occasions, I have said how concerned I am with the French in Canada and Quebec. We reaffirmed our commitment to it in the throne speech. We are taking action, and that is why we will be modernizing the Official Languages Act. We stated that in the throne speech. And we also acknowledged that there had been a decline in French. I hope the colleague opposite would have supported it, but he voted against the throne speech, and he voted against official languages, as did his colleagues. The honourable member. That member sits on the Official Languages Committee. She defends her party's positions, and frankly, we can't say that the Liberal Party has been a great ally of French in Quebec. The party voted against the application of Bill 101 to companies under federal jurisdiction, against a knowledge of French to obtain citizenship in Quebec. It funds English-speaking communities in Quebec, but doesn't support French, which is threatened in Quebec. Do they realize that the federal government isn't helping French in Quebec, but continuing to hinder it? The Honourable Minister. Since 1969, the federal government has been supporting both official languages, and good recommendations were made back in the day. Bilingualism was put in place by Pierre Elliott Trudeau, and all Quebecers have access to services in French. A lot of water has gone under the bridge, as we say, Mr. Speaker, since then, and we are protecting French, which is a minority language across Canada and in North America. The government acknowledges the situation exists, and that is why we're taking action. The Honourable Member for La Pointe-Lille. Mr. Speaker, the member for Saint-Laurent said out loud what the Liberals are thinking in English to show the importance they attach to French. It's hardly surprising. She made her inaugural speech in English only, saying that Anglophones are the ones who support her. But there's only one official language in Quebec, only one endangered language, and that is French. Is the government going to wake up and acknowledge what's happened over the past 50 years and start supporting Bill 101 for companies under its jurisdiction by requiring knowledge of French for citizenship in the province? The Government House Leader. Mr. Speaker, it's not up to my colleague to tell us what members of the Liberal Party think. I can tell him because I sit with them and we acknowledge that there is a decline. We acknowledge the importance of supporting French, and not only throughout Canada, but also in Quebec. We stated that in the throne speech. We have stated it publicly. I know that the Bloc is looking for squabbling, but we will always take a stand for French on this side of the House.
For Lakeland.
Mr. Speaker, CSIS says China's communist regime uses spies to intimidate and threaten Chinese Canadians to suppress dissent on Canadian soil. China's Operation Fox Hunt is an attack on Canadian sovereignty and national security. The Prime Minister says he's, quote, long been concerned, and that he brings it up when he engages with China. The victims of these bullies sounded the alarm, and they have the courage to stand up. So, specifically, what is this government actually doing to protect them?
The Minister of Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, let me be very clear that our government has been and will continue to take action to protect Canadians, their personal information and their interests from any threat or intimidation from foreign interference or espionage, including threats to our economy, intellectual property, critical supply chains, and communities. And Mr. Speaker, as the NSI COP report released earlier this year makes very clear, we recognize the hostile activities of state actors, such as China, as a key and growing risk in this regard. Mr. Speaker, we remain constantly vigilant against these risks.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
Beyond so-called recognition and all these words, what is the actual action? Almost 80% of Canadians believe China constitutes a threat to Canada. Recently, the Chinese ambassador threatened Canadians in Hong Kong. Canadian citizens are in arbitrary imprisonment, and Canadian lives are at risk in China. The Liberals' failure to stand up for human rights and to protect Canadians all over the world is emboldening these state-sponsored bullies. How can Canadians feel safe anywhere when the Liberals clearly don't have their backs?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for the question. However, at the very premise of that question is that Canada is making strong representations on an almost daily basis with respect to the issues around China. Reports of harassment and intimidation of individuals in Canada are deeply troubling. Allegations of such acts being carried out by foreign agents are taken very seriously. Chinese representatives of their government in Canada, like all foreign government representatives in Canada, have a duty under international law to respect the laws and regulations of Canada. Canada will continue to use every measure available to us to stand up for Canadians and their rights.
The Honourable Member for Lakeland.
So just tell Canadians these measures. Canadians are under threat and they deserve action, not just words. 3 weeks ago, 8 people were charged for intimidating and harassing Chinese Americans in the U.S. American officials say there's an aggressive commitment to protect their citizens from China's campaign of illegally imposing its will. The Prime Minister does admit, as do these ministers, that this is happening to Canadians. So one more time, how many people have actually been charged in Canada for going after Canadians in Operation Fox Hunt?
Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. And let me assure this House that we do not in any way tolerate foreign actors, hostile state actors threatening Canada's national security or the safety of any of our citizens. And I want to assure this House and all Canadians that our security agencies and law enforcement agencies have the skills and resources and the legal authority that they need to detect, investigate, and respond to every such threat. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Courtenay Alberni.
Mr. Speaker, the Liberals have left thousands of small businesses, especially startups, to fend for themselves throughout the pandemic, and they're desperate for help with a second wave hitting. Many entrepreneurs still can't access CEBA, the wage subsidy, or other small business supports. And now the government is refusing to backdate support for commercial rent relief to April. For months, small businesses have been left behind by government programs, and many now have massive debts and are facing bankruptcy. Will the minister do the right thing and backdate the broken secret program to April 1st to save thousands of small businesses across Canada?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank the honourable member for that really important question. The programs that we have put forward are the lifeline to our small businesses, whether it is the fixed cost support for rent and making sure they have that support today and going forward. Over 780,000 businesses have taken advantage of the small business loan, with more to come as we increased another $20,000. The Canadian Emergency Wage Subsidy is providing that necessary help to keep employees on those companies' payroll. This work continues. I'm thrilled to work with all members on all sides of the House to make sure we are supporting Canada's small businesses. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for North Island, Powell River.
Well, Mr. Speaker, businesses need retroactive payment. This country is in the grips of the second wave of the COVID-19 pandemic. In parts of the country, cases are higher than they were in the spring. It is critical that people can stay home to stop the spread of this virus. Instead of supporting Canadians to help save lives, the Prime Minister is now threatening to take away those very supports. Previously, he said that this government would do whatever is necessary to see our country through COVID-19. Can the Prime Minister promise Canadians they will have the financial support that they desperately need to stay home and save lives?
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the member opposite for her concern for Canadians' lives and safety, and in fact, that's what we've been focused on since the beginning. We've been there for provinces and territories, Mr. Speaker, no matter what measures they need, no matter what tools they need, Mr. Speaker, whether it was providing financial support for Canadians to stay home, whether it's support for small businesses and indeed medium and large-sized businesses to stay viable during this time. And Mr. Speaker, for provinces and territories, $19 billion, as well as additional supports to the Canadian Red Cross and others. I could go on, Mr. Speaker. We will be there for Canadians.
The Honourable Member for Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, many constituencies in my riding of Richmond Hill rely on accessible public transit to commute to work and home safely. The proposed Yonge North Subway extension is a major step in connecting Toronto and York region. Can the Minister kindly update the House on the progress of this infrastructure project and other investments in public transit? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister for Infrastructure.
I'd like to thank the member for Richmond Hill for his question and for his continued advocacy for the Yonge North Subway. Our government has invested over $13 billion in public transit, more than 13 times the previous government, while the Conservatives called for cuts to infrastructure. We look forward to working with the province and seeing a business case from them for the Yonge Subway extension so that we can get it built, creating good jobs, reducing emissions, and helping people get around their communities faster.
Honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, Canada is the only Five Eyes member to neither ban nor restrict the use of Huawei 5G equipment. Why are we allowing the Chinese government to bully and intimidate our country in a brute force attempt to potentially surrender our citizens' data, privacy, and security?
Minister of Industry.
Mr. Speaker, we know the potential when it comes to 5G technology and the important impact it will have on Canadians and our economy going forward. That is why we continue to do our due diligence and work with national security experts. We continue to work with our allies, and I can assure the member opposite, we never have and never will compromise when it comes to the safety and well-being of Canadians, and we will make a decision in the best interest of Canadians.
The honourable member for Edmonton Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the EU's General Data Protection Regulation mandates that all business activities by Huawei meet its requirements. This allowed them to rule that Huawei was in breach of a European privacy law when it failed to comply with the request to provide the data it kept on EU citizens. Can the minister be clear? Will Canada's Personal Information Protection Act take similar steps to identify companies that are deemed a security threat and take coercive action if needed?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for his very thoughtful question when it comes to the privacy and protection of individual data of Canadians. That is why we've been very clear about presenting the Digital Charter, which has 10 principles which will guide future legislation and policies and programs that will keep Canadians' privacy and data safe and secure. And I look forward to having a meaningful conversation on the subject matter very soon.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Mr. Speaker, effective public transit will be key to economic recovery after COVID, and York Region is no exception. The Yonge Line is at capacity and just doesn't go far enough north. The Yonge Subway extension would create 60,000 jobs, reduce gridlock, and deliver economic growth for the entire GTA. The Ontario government has committed to invest, but this Liberal government is still refusing to act. What is this government waiting for? Why won't they invest in the Yonge Subway extension?
Bull Ministry.
Mr. Speaker, I'm delighted to stand up and talk about our investments in public transit. Our government has invested over $13 billion in public transit. That's more than 13 times what the previous government invested. And the Conservatives actually called for cuts to infrastructure. We look forward to working with the province. We look forward to receiving a business case for the extension so that we can get it built, creating jobs, reducing emissions, and helping people get around their communities faster.
The honourable member for Aurora, Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
The federal government says it's committed to public transit in Ontario, but apparently not to the Yonge Subway extension. The Yonge Line is the lifeblood of the GTA, with 800,000 commuters a day and almost 100,000 of them passing through Finch. For jobs, economic recovery, and growth, the GTA needs a Union Station of the North. The business case is obvious. Why won't the Liberals get this Yonge Subway extension on track? What's the real reason they won't invest?
Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to reiterate again our commitment to public transit. We've invested more than $13 billion, but let's look at the previous Conservative government. We invested 13 times more. And what did they call in the last election? They called for cuts to public transit. I'm not sure that they would be committed to the investments in public transit that we so desperately need to make. But we are committed to the Yonge North Subway extension, but we need to be accountable to taxpayers. We need to see a business case, and then we will move forward because we want to create good jobs. We want to tackle climate change. We want to build more inclusive communities.
The honourable member for Drummond. Mr. Speaker, yesterday evening on Tout le monde en parle, the Minister of Heritage said he was hopeful that in the next budget, the web giants would be subject to GST. What we need isn't hope, it's the political will. The minister doesn't have to wait till the next budget. He could simply, as of this afternoon, require Google, Apple, Facebook, Amazon et al. To charge GST like everyone else. Even they say they're open to it. The government just has to act. It just has to ask. It's a question of tax fairness. Everybody pays their taxes. When is the minister going to act? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for his question. Last week, we tabled a bill that would reform the Broadcasting Act. It's the first time in 30 years. And that act will have significant impacts and advantages for Canadian culture. And our colleagues know this full well because we consulted them repeatedly before the bill was tabled. That will make it possible to add about $1 billion to allow us to tell our stories in French, in Quebec, in Canada, in English, in Indigenous languages. It's a first in Canada. The Honourable Member for Drummond. Well, we're talking about two different things here because in our conversations we stress the importance of tax fairness, and that is forcing the web giants to collect the GST. 3 heritage ministers in a row, all ironically from Quebec, have made this promise, but Quebec's already figured it out. They already charge sales tax on the web giants. The minister is depriving Quebec culture, which has already been hard hit by the pandemic, of hundreds of millions of dollars, while GAFA is making record profits. He can require them to collect the GST. Why won't he? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to remind my honourable colleague that over $4 billion has been provided to arts and culture since the pandemic hit. According to a recent poll, almost 78% of artists are very happy with what the federal government has done. Of course, we could do more, and we will do more. And the broadcasting bill is not aimed at tax. It's more about broadcasting, but we will continue to make changes to improve the system in Canada. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The government's announcement on rural broadband last week was too little, too late. Rural small businesses need broadband now, not between 2026 and 2030. This government was late on commercial rent assistance, late on the wage subsidy, and they're busy auditing small businesses in the middle of a pandemic. The Prime Minister wants more lockdowns, and rural small businesses don't have the infrastructure to move online. Why do small businesses always have to pay the price for this government's COVID responses?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, last week we launched phase 2 of our government's plan to connect every Canadian to high-speed internet. The Universal Broadband Funds builds on our efforts, which we began early on in our first mandate. It's the plan Canadians asked for. It's the plan our rural members of Parliament shaped. It's a plan shaped by experts. It includes flexibility, backbone, last mile, a rapid response stream. I want to thank the Prime Minister for his care and support for rural Canada, and particularly for appointing the member from Long Range Mountains to co-lead this file with me. She truly moves mountains.
The Honourable Member for Red Deer Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Millions of people in rural communities across Canada lack adequate internet connections. The announcement made by the Liberal governments last week won't change this. One reason is because a large portion of funding is through the Canada Infrastructure Bank, which in 3 years, that Liberal boondoggle has completed 0 projects. Why does this Liberal government continue to fail hardworking rural Canadians through smoke and mirror initiatives that get great headlines, but thanks to Liberal incompetence, accomplish nothing?
Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, because of our government's efforts, tens of thousands of households at the end of this year will be connected to this essential service. Because of our government's commitment to rural Canadians, we have put more in investments than all previous governments combined. In fact, our government's support in rural broadband is 10 times higher than all governments who have come before us. Mr. Speaker, there's an unusual consensus emerging across the country that every Canadian deserves access to this essential service. Our plan is the plan Canadians asked for. It will work. I encourage colleagues to support their communities to put high-quality applications forward.
The Honourable Member for the Beauce. Mr. Speaker, in this pandemic, a lot of students in my riding have had to stay home and attend school virtually. They're at a disadvantage simply because they live in a rural area. Chantal Bédard from Sainte-Enedine got in touch with me to talk about her kids' problems connecting to their online classes. From Sainte-Enedine to Saint-Gédéon in my riding, I keep hearing the same stories. This government loves to re-announce its funding commitments for high-speed internet, but when are they going to release their actual plan to connect people like Ms. Bédard? The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, women like Chantal have been hit hardest by COVID, and one of the additional responsibilities they bear is supporting their kids with online learning. When that high-speed internet access is not a reliable one, Chantal's life is that much more difficult. We have heard her. We are working to address the challenge. Before the Universal Broadband Fund was launched last week, our government had already invested 5 times more to connect the people of Quebec than the previous government. We know the work is not done, but there is a program there to support Canadians get connected. I encourage my colleague to work with us to do that.
L'honorable député de Moncton.
The Honourable Member for Moncton Riverview, Dieppe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I was thrilled to hear about the commitment that our government has made towards the creation of a Canada-wide learning and childcare system. We also know that help is needed, especially now, to help support parents as they re-enter the labour market. Can the Minister of Families, Children and Social Development please update this House on the investments being made in New Brunswick to support families through this economic recovery?
Minister.
Thank the honourable colleague for this question and for continued and effective advocacy on this issue. We know that for Canadians, childcare is not a luxury, it's a necessity. COVID has shown this especially to be true. That's why Minister Sain was pleased to announce today a $14 million investment to help make childcare more accessible and affordable for New Brunswickers through the Safe Restart Agreement. This is in addition to $10 million announced just a couple of weeks ago to support thousands of families in that province. This government has invested more in childcare this year than any other government in Canadian history. We're proud of that record, but there's more to do. A national framework, national funding is needed. We hope the other parties in this House can be disciplined and continue to support our good work on this file.
Well, member for Dauphin, Swan River, Neepawa.
Mr. Speaker, more than ever, Canadians appreciate how essential farmers are. In a time of need, farmers stepped up to feed Canadians and made sure our grocery stores' shelves were fully stocked. Earlier this month, the opposition secured relief for small businesses who were burdened by emergency wage subsidy audits. These audits are causing distress and anxiety amongst our farmers. Will the minister confirm that this relief for small businesses will include our Canadian farm families?
The Honourable Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I can assure you that we have been working closely with our farmers since the beginning of the COVID crisis, and we have made sure that they were eligible to all the programs that were meant to support businesses, like the CEBA, like the subsidy support as well. And I can assure you that we will continue to make sure that our farmers are well supported.
The Honourable Member for Saskatoon West.
Mr. Speaker, last month I met with Chorus Aviation, who, like many in the air industry, were waiting with bated breath for the Transport Minister's aid package. They are a maritime success story and operate many of Air Canada's regional routes. And as Air Canada struggles, Chorus is struggling too. The Saskatoon Airport depends on their planes staying aloft. Mr. Speaker, Liberal MPs in Nova Scotia won't challenge the government on behalf of Chorus, but I will. Why won't the minister expand rapid COVID testing to all airports so airlines can attract customers back onto planes?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member for his question. And of course, as I pointed out about 10 days ago, we are working on an aid package with respect to the air sector, and that includes airports as well as airlines. And we are also in parallel, led by the Minister of Health, working on rapid testing. As he will know, there is rapid testing underway at Calgary Airport and a separate test being done at Toronto Airport. We realize that this may be a way of speeding up and reducing quarantine.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse-les-Etchemins, Lévis. Mr. Speaker, the Quebec City Bridge is a Canadian heritage symbol, and 5 years ago the Liberals promised to repaint it. But since then, the paint has been drying on the paintbrushes. While the Liberals try to window dress, to buy time, they retained a negotiator to acquire the bridge. But after 6 months, where is the Charest report? When are they going to release it and apply its recommendations? The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Government of Canada acknowledges the importance of restoring the Quebec City Bridge. In August 2019, Yvon Charest was appointed as a special negotiator with a mandate to recommend options for the restoration of the bridge in cooperation with stakeholders. This is a priority for the Government of Canada. Mr. Charest and myself share one common goal, and that is to see to it that the Quebec City Bridge meets long-term needs in the region of Quebec City. We will keep you abreast of the results of the negotiators' analysis as soon as possible.
Mr. Speaker, cases of COVID-19 are growing in Ontario, and modelling suggests that the number of cases could increase dramatically in the coming months. As former Chief Medical Officer of Health for York Region and former Ontario Minister of Health and Long-Term Care, I can see how important federal support has been in Ontario's response to the pandemic. Can the Minister of Health please update us on the investments and support that our government has provided to the province of Ontario to date?
Excellent. Well, Minister.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I want to thank the member for her leadership and her expertise and experience. It certainly has been helpful to me over the past several months to have conversations with her. We've been there to support Ontario all the way through in the responsibility of delivering on health care. In fact, over the summer, 97 cents on every dollar spent on pandemic support in Ontario came from the federal government. We also supported through the Safe Restart Agreement $5.1 billion for effective testing, contact tracing data systems, support for long-term care, 1.78 million rapid tests to date, and of course the Army and the Red Cross have been supporting in long-term care homes. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Churchill, Kiiwetinoong-Aski.
Mr. Speaker, First Nations, Métis, and Inuit communities have worked tirelessly to stay safe, but this second wave has hit hard, as we have warned. Ostien Napa, 147 cases. Arviat, up to 26 cases. For First Nations, we're seeing higher rates of infection and increased severity. From mass testing to immediate contact tracing to self-isolation to ventilators, the government must pull out all the stops. What are they going to do for First Nations, Métis, and now Inuit communities to stop the spread of COVID-19?
Minister.
I thank the member for her question and her tireless advocacy on behalf of Indigenous peoples. I do think that she will, and the House will appreciate the update that I have with respect to Opaskwayak. I've been in conversations with Chief Sinclair over the course of the weekend to ensure that the surge capacity of the Government of Canada is there to help the community, as well as in its role as a hub in the coming weeks. We are now at double the active rate than the total cases that occurred during the first wave. This is indeed exceedingly alarming, and First Nations, Inuit, and Métis should know that the Government of Canada will always be there for them, and they will not be left behind. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Nanaimo, Ladysmith.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The government has reserved 414 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines with 6 private sector contracts. What will this cost taxpayers? For 70 years, government-owned Connaught Labs developed low-cost vaccines and other medicines. This model would ensure the financial viability of a universal pharmacare program in Canada. Will the government return to this model of publicly owned laboratories to develop low-cost medicines and vaccines to serve the greater good?
The Honourable Minister of Innovations.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my honourable colleague for his very important question. And it highlights and underscores our Made in Canada initiative, where we're investing in Canadian ingenuity and creativity and supporting our scientists and researchers. That is why I'm proud to say that we've made significant investments in therapeutics and vaccine initiatives here in Canada. For example, from Vancouver, Abcellera received our support. Also, Medicago from Quebec City. We also invested in VBI in Ottawa, and of course, in Saskatoon through Vital Intervac. and Dartmouth's MIV. These are some examples of the Made in Canada solutions that we have come forward with, Mr. Speaker.